William Shakespeare's daughter was illiterate. During World War I, a British soldier spared the life of a wounded German, Adolf Hitler. Julius Caesar was involved with Servilia Scipionis, who happened to be the mother of his assassin Brutus. Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire, was known for his brutal tactics in war. However, he also had a softer side and was reportedly very fond of kittens. Frank Lucas, a notorious drug lord from Harlem, once smuggled heroin into the United States in the coffins of dead American soldiers during the Vietnam War. Blackbeard's head was cut off and hung from the bow spread of the ship that had captured him as a warning to other would-be pirates. The Soviet Union had the largest army of World War II, mobilizing 21 million troops throughout the war, with a peak strength of 13.2 million. Kim Jong-il, the former leader of North Korea, was a huge movie buff and owned a collection of over 20,000 movies. He even kidnapped a South Korean film director and his actress wife and forced them to make movies for him. Amelia Earhart was in an open marriage. She didn't want to be tied down to one person, and she didn't want her relationship to interfere with her work. Pablo Escobar once burned $2 million in cash just to keep his family warm while they were on the run from the authorities. In ancient Rome, there was a sponge in the baths that everyone used to wipe their bottoms. In the Colosseum, some gladiators would shove that sponge down their throats and kill themselves rather than die in the arena. Doctors in the 1800s would prescribe smoking as a treatment for asthma. Pablo Picasso, the famous Spanish artist, had many lovers and was known for his womanizing ways. He once said, "Every time I change a woman, I have to burn the last one. She costs me too much in paint." King Gugian of Yue had waves of convicted criminals at the front of his army. Before the battle, the criminals would cut their own throats to scare the enemy's army and to show how crazy Gugian's army was. Fidel Castro suggested to the Kremlin a tougher stance against Washington and even proposed nuclear strikes. But the idea was dropped after Soviet officials informed him of the ecological impact on Cuba in 1973. In the ancient Persian Empire, men used to debate ideas twice, once sober and once drunk. This was because the idea had to sound good in both states in order to be considered a good idea. King Louis XV of France commissioned a diamond-studded fly swatter to be made, which he would use to swat flies during court sessions. Ancient Greek and Roman statues were actually brilliantly colored and not just bare marble or stone. Benjamin Hornigold once captured a merchant ship solely for the purpose of stealing all their hats. This was because his crew had gotten drunk and lost their hats during a party the night before. Nelson Mandela and Muammar Gaddafi were close friends. Pythagoras founded a cult that forbade the eating of beans. He believed you should never eat fava beans because they give you gas, and expelling gas took away the breath of life. He also claimed fava beans contained the souls of the dead. After World War I, there were so few men in Germany that only 1 in 3 women would find a husband. The only Japanese passenger on the Titanic who survived the disaster was condemned and ostracized by the Japanese public, press, and government for not dying honorably like the others. The last official Civil War widow, Helen Viola, died in 2020. The earliest ever lottery was during the Chinese Han Dynasty between 205 to 187 BC. Hamburgers in the U.S. were dubbed Liberty Steaks to avoid the German-sounding name. The Milky Way supposedly got its name because it was formed when the Greek goddess Hera sprayed her breast milk into the sky in the 16th and 17th centuries. During the Napoleonic Wars of the early 19th century, a shipwrecked monkey was hanged by the people of Hartlepool, England, believing him to be a French spy. Lord Byron, the Romantic poet, was angered that his college didn't allow dogs in dorms, so he kept a pet bear instead. Emperor Vespasian famously taxed public urinals, earning the nickname piss taxer. When his son Titus complained that it was a distasteful way to make money, Vespasian held the money collected to his son's nose and asked him if it smelled. After Titus said no, Vespasian replied, "Yet it comes from urine." Vespasian's scheme was a real golden opportunity. In early Rome, a father could legally kill anyone in his family. Animals were put on trial in medieval times and routinely sentenced to death. Persian leader Cambyses II used cats to defeat an Egyptian army. He had his soldiers paint cats on their shields and brought hundreds of actual cats and other animals that the Egyptians held sacred to the front lines. The Egyptians refused to fight the cat army, and instead, they retreated, and most were massacred by the pursuing Persians. This ultimately led to the capture of the pharaoh. Captain Robert Campbell, a British prisoner of war captured by the Germans in World War I, was freed to see his dying mother, then went back to the prison camp because he gave the Kaiser his word he would return. In 2003, the U.S. troops found approximately $650 million inside the walls of Saddam Hussein's palace. The oldest human footprint ever found is 350,000 years old. Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, was buried with an army of terracotta soldiers to protect him in the afterlife. Jack Legs Diamond, a notorious bootlegger and gangster from New York, once survived being shot 15 times during an assassination attempt. He later joked that he was too mean to die. Cleopatra is rumored to have invented the world's first vibrator using a hollow gourd filled with angry bees. Thomas Jefferson broke his wrist while attempting to jump over a fence in Paris to impress Maria Causeway, a married woman. The injury caused chronic pain, forcing him to switch to being a lefty. The Soviet Union had an all-female fighter pilot squadron during World War II called the Night Witches. They flew wooden planes and had to turn off their engines to drop bombs undetected, earning their nickname from the eerie whooshing sound they made. Benito Mussolini ordered the train station clocks to be set ahead to make it look like the notoriously late Italian trains were running on time. Unfortunately, the move backfired as it led to even more confusion and delays. Queen Elizabeth I of England was known for her love of sweets and had horrible rotten teeth as a result. During a triumph in ancient Rome, a slave would walk behind the victorious general, whispering under all the applause and acclaim, "Memento mori," remember your mortality, to remind him not to get above himself. 4 empires collapsed after the war: Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, German, and Russian. Caterina Sforza Riario, an Italian noblewoman from the 1400s, locked herself in a castle to save herself from her enemies. Her enemies managed to capture her children and threatened to kill them if she wouldn't surrender. She climbed on ramparts, lifted her skirt to expose her female parts, and shouted, "Fools, don't you see that I can make myself more children?" Adolf Hitler was a vegetarian and would often go on rants about the dangers of smoking and drinking. However, he had a sweet tooth for cakes and chocolate. He also suffered from a number of health problems, including chronic flatulence. Roman gladiators' sweat would be mixed into perfumes because they believed it to be an aphrodisiac. Edward Lowe once burned a French ship captain's lips with a red-hot iron. This was because the captain refused to reveal the location of his hidden treasure. Grover Cleveland had an illegitimate child. His opponent's campaign slogan was, "Mama, where's my paw?" Glover's supporters responded, "Gone to the White House." Ha 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 ha. President Theodore Roosevelt wore a ring that contained a lock of Abraham Lincoln's hair during his inauguration. The New Zealand badminton team was nicknamed the Black, but had to drop it after complaints. In 1866, Liechtenstein sent out an army of 80 men to participate in the Austro-Prussian War. They came back with 81 men, suffering no casualties and having made one friend. The Austrian army once mistakenly attacked and fought against themselves during the Battle of Karansebes. The confusion led to hundreds of casualties. 20 to 30 million people died because a Chinese guy proclaimed himself the brother of Jesus Christ, known as the Taiping Rebellion. During the Middle Ages, it was common for people to believe that they could be possessed by demons if they fell asleep in church. Abraham Lincoln was challenged to a duel to the death. He accepted on the condition he got to choose the location and weapons. He chose to duel on a small island with broadswords. His challenger backed out. British soldiers got a ration of 3 sheets of toilet paper a day, while Americans got 22. Crazy Emperor Caligula once declared war on the sea god Neptune and ordered his soldiers to attack the waves with swords and spears. His soldiers collected seashells as spoils of victory. Between 1913 and 1915, people could mail babies via the U.S. Postal Service. Michelangelo, the Italian artist, was very unhygienic. He would go to bed in his clothes and boots. His assistant said he would sometimes go so long without taking his boots off that his skin would come away with his boots. The British Royal Air Force accidentally sunk a ship full of Holocaust victims in 1945. In the 18th century, dentures were often made from the teeth of deceased soldiers. In 1912, a man named Franz Reichelt jumped off the Eiffel Tower while wearing a homemade parachute. He died on impact. Pablo Picasso, the famous artist, was known to carry a revolver filled with blanks, which he would fire at people who asked him to explain the meaning behind his paintings. Salvador Dali once painted a picture of Adolf Hitler having a wank. James Madison was only 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed less than 100 pounds. Making him the smallest president in U.S. history. When drunk guests fell asleep, Emperor Elagabalus would have them moved into a room where they would wake up to find themselves surrounded by wild animals. Theodore Roosevelt was shot in the chest during a speech. He continued speaking for another 90 minutes before seeking medical attention, insisting that it would take more than a bullet to stop him. Emperor Tiberius would order his soldiers to throw slaves off a cliff into the sea for his amusement. Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel was making an estimated $60 million a day from the sale of cocaine. King Henry VII of England had a personal groom of the stool whose job was to assist the king in the bathroom and clean him after he used the toilet. Andrew Jackson was riddled with bullets from duels. Once, during a meeting in the White House, he removed a bullet from his arm with no anesthesia. He then gave the bullet to one of the people he had dueled and said, "I believe this is yours." Bill Millen, a Scottish bagpiper, was among the first waves to invade the beaches on D-Day. Piper Bill walked up and down Sword Beach playing Highland tunes. Some Germans who claimed to have seen him didn't shoot because they believed he was crazy. He lived through the war and died in 2010. President William Howard Taft once got stuck in a White House bathtub and had to be helped out by several assistants. That's a slippery situation. Julie Daubigny was a famous 17th century French opera singer who once took the holy vows to enter a convent just so she could sleep with a nun. She also had a habit of seducing women at parties, which would lead their husbands to challenge her to a duel. She was an expert duelist and killed a few men like this. New Zealand raised an army of 100,000 men, about 10% of its population, during the first Christmas of World War I. Soldiers from both sides spontaneously declared unofficial truces along the Western Front. They exchanged greetings, sang carols, and even played football together in no man's land. Harold Holt, the former Prime Minister of Australia, went swimming one day and disappeared, never to be seen again. He was presumed to have drowned or been killed by a shark. They named a swimming center after him because nothing says, "We're sorry you drowned," like a public pool. Mayans played a ball game where the losing team was sometimes sacrificed. Talk about a killer match. There was a mosaic uncovered in Pompeii which served as a doormat with letters below it that read Cave Canem in Latin, which translates as "Beware of the dog." Tsar Peter the Great of Russia once hosted a mock wedding between his favorite dwarf and a woman who was over 7 feet tall. Emperor Caligula was so obsessed with his own divine status that he declared himself a god and demanded that people worship him. He even had statues of himself placed in every temple in Rome. What's even more bizarre is that he appointed his horse as a consul, one of the highest positions in the Roman government. That's some serious horsepower. King Henry VII of England had a giant codpiece that he wore to accentuate his manhood. Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, ironically, had a personal dwarf named Goliath, In 1879, cats were used to deliver mail in Belgium. However, it was a catastrophic failure. Stephen Hawking, the acclaimed physicist, loved going to strip clubs. He had been seen lying on a bed fully clothed with two naked women gyrating all over him. That's one way to study black holes. 7 of the 10 deadliest wars in human history have been in China. The Taiping Rebellion alone had twice as many deaths as World War I. Emperor Nero of Rome was notorious for his cruelty, and he would often use Christians as human torches to light his garden parties. I guess you could say Nero's parties were lit. Emperor Valentinian got so angry while cussing out a group of foreign diplomats who he felt insulted him that he suffered an aneurysm and died mid-sentence. Felix Faure, a French president, died while receiving oral sex. In France during World War I, prostitutes would charge more money if they had syphilis. That's because a soldier contracting the disease would get 1 month off to the hospital, escaping the harsh conditions of the trenches. Xerxes ordered the construction of pontoon bridges to cross the Hellespont, but a storm destroyed them before completion. In his anger, Xerxes beheaded every engineer involved and ordered that the sea be punished with 300 lashes. El Chapo, the former leader of the Sinaloa cartel, had a private zoo that included lions, tigers, and panthers. He also had a diamond-encrusted pistol that was valued at $100,000. About 100 billion people have died in all of human history. Napoleon Bonaparte, the French emperor, was not actually short. He was of average height for his time, standing at around 5 feet 7 inches. I guess Napoleon wasn't as short as his temper. Pyrrhus, king of emperors, won 2 battles against the Romans, but with such heavy casualties that he is quoted as saying, "Another such victory, and I come back to emperors alone." In ancient Greece, wearing skirts was manly. In fact, they viewed trousers as feminine and would mock any men who wore them. The word avocado comes from the Aztec word aguacatel, which also means testicle. After the war, a group of Jewish avengers formulated a Holocaust revenge plan to kill 6 million Germans by poisoning the water supply of many German cities. However, it was foiled by British police while the poison was in transit. Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Julius Caesar, Mussolini, and Hitler all suffered from ailurophobia, the fear of cats. Teddy Roosevelt was an accomplished boxer and often sparred with professional fighters, including middleweight champion Jack O'Brien. North Koreans may only choose from 28 approved haircuts. Muammar Gaddafi, the dictator of Libya for 40 years, was overthrown by rebel forces in 2011 and killed with his old golden pistol. Interracial marriage was banned in the U.S. for much of its history from 1776 to 1967. Ancient Greeks used to make statues with small penises because it was a symbol of masculinity back in the day. During the time of Nazi-occupied France, a French train conductor learned that a train full of German soldiers had derailed. Instead of fixing it, he sent more trains full of soldiers to the wreck, until the Nazis caught on and had him removed. Roman emperors often held lavish feasts where they would consume vast quantities of food and drink. Vomitoriums were installed for them to vomit so they could eat more. King Edward II of England was rumored to have been murdered by having a red-hot poker inserted into his rectum. Although there is no concrete evidence to support this claim, it has become a popular legend in English history. The first recorded joke dates back to ancient Sumeria and is about a woman farting. Constantine II, the last Eastern Roman emperor, whose last words were, "The city has fallen, but I am still alive," then tore off his imperial ornaments and charged off into the Ottoman attackers, never to be seen again. Cleopatra was called Mario Chain by the Greeks, which means she who gapes wide for 10,000 men. Isaac Newton reportedly stuck a needle in his eye to see what would happen. What an eye-opening experience. In ancient Babylon, if a house collapsed and killed the owner, the builder was put to death. However, if the owner's son was killed, the builder's son was put to death. This eye-for-an-eye approach was one of many harsh laws outlined in Hammurabi's code. King George II of England died while sitting on the toilet from an aortic dissection. What a crappy way to go. Abraham Lincoln was a trash-talking wrestler in the Army. As president, Lincoln was a patient leader, but as a young adult, he'd kick your ass. During one of his wrestling matches, Lincoln defeated his opponent and then turned to the crowd and said, "I'm the big buck of this lick. If any of you want to try it, come on and wet your horns," which is basically 19th century speak for "come at me, bro." Lord Byron, the romantic poet and notorious womanizer, had his body exhumed in 1938. They discovered he had a humongous schlong. Aristotle, the famed Greek philosopher, tutored Alexander the Great. The Princess of Liechtenstein got so pissed at a countess criticizing her flower choices at a party that she challenged her to a topless, all-female sword duel. King Vajiralongkorn of Thailand sued his first wife for divorce. She was unable to defend herself in court because of a law forbidding criticism of the king. Roman Emperor Caracalla was assassinated while having diarrhea. His bodyguards killed him while his hands were occupied. Emperor Nero had his own mother killed. Mexican President Santa Anna lost his leg in battle, but he later had it exhumed and gave it a full military funeral with honors. Emperor Nero had a group of dwarves dressed up as famous mythological characters who would then entertain him by reenacting famous battles and myths. He also threw a party where he had a pool filled with wine for his guests to swim in. The use of the word hooker originated during the American Civil War. General Joseph Hooker would often bring them to his campaigns, leading to the adoption of the term hooker to refer to prostitutes among his men. In the 19th century, women in the Western world used to wear cages called crinolines under their dresses to achieve exaggeratedly wide skirts. These crinolines sometimes caused accidents, getting stuck in doorways or causing women to lose balance. A teenage Beethoven performed for Mozart, which prompted Mozart to say, "Keep your eyes on him someday. He'll give the world something to talk about." Pablo Picasso's flat was searched by German soldiers in Nazi-occupied Paris. One officer spotted a reproduction of Guernica, a renowned painting depicting the atrocities of German air units bombing a Spanish city during the Spanish Civil War. When asked by a Nazi soldier, "Did you do that?" Picasso responded with, "No, you did." Isaac Newton once threatened to burn his mother and stepfather alive. Einstein was once asked what it was like to be the smartest man alive. He replied, "I don't know. Ask Nikola Tesla." King Henry VII of England had a chamber pot made of solid gold, which he used only once before having it melted down and turned into coins. Louis de Bourbon-Soissons, second cousin of King Louis VIII, led a battle against the royal army with the support of Spain. He was about to crush the French army and win the battle. Seeing victory was near, he lifted up the visor of his helmet with his pistol and inadvertently shot himself in the head. When Queen Victoria passed away, her courtiers didn't just mourn her, they also took a liking to her undergarments with her royal cipher VR stitched onto every piece. They were easily identifiable. In fact, a private collector even shelled out £12,000 for a pair of her royal cotton knickers. I wonder if her courtiers fought over who got to keep the Victoria's Secret collection. From 1814 to 1830, the flag of the Kingdom of France was plain white. It seems the French surrendered so often they made it their flag. Pedro Lopez, known as the Monster of the Andes, was convicted in 1983 of killing 110 young girls, though he confessed to killing 300. Lopez was released in 1998 after serving Ecuador's maximum sentence of 20 years. His whereabouts are presently unknown. Emperor Elagabalus, upon entering Rome to become crowned emperor, had hundreds of naked women drag his chariot down the streets of Rome. King Charles II made a wig from the pubic hair of his lovers. After Charles would make love to a woman, he used to get some of her pubic hair. He eventually stitched all of them into a wig, with the largest contributor being his favorite mistress, Nell Gwynn. He later donated this wig to a club and had people come and kiss the wig. George W. Bush, the former president of the United States, was a cheerleader in high school and even served as head cheerleader his senior year. He also gave up alcohol after a drunken episode at his 40th birthday party, during which he reportedly challenged his father to a fistfight. Kim Jong-un, the supreme leader of North Korea, killed his own uncle by throwing him naked into a cage with 120 starving dogs. Oskar Kokoschka, the German artist, commissioned a life-size doll of his former lover Alma Mahler, complete with fake teeth and feathery skin. He eventually grew bored with the doll decapitated. It soaked it in alcohol and tossed it out the window. Ronald Reagan's first job was a lifeguard. Over those 6 years, he saved 77 people from drowning. Back in World War I, soldiers would tattoo themselves, so if they died during an explosion, they would still be identified. Only 1 out of every 4 men serving on U-boats survived. Griselda Blanco, also known as the Queen of Cocaine, ordered the assassination of 3 of her husbands. Bartholomew Roberts, known as the Dread Pirate. Roberts had a unique superstition. He believed that wearing his favorite red waistcoat in battle made him invincible. He was killed by a cannon blast. Neanderthals, living 90,000 years ago in a seafront cave in what's now Portugal, regularly caught crabs, roasted them on coals, and ate the cooked flesh. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt, was rumored to have bathed in donkey's milk to keep her skin soft and smooth. John Tyler, the 10th U.S. president, has a living grandson as of 2023. Despite being born in 1790. Since 1945, all British tanks have been equipped with tea-making equipment and facilities. In 1830, sucking a king's nipples was a gesture of submission in ancient Ireland. The dildo was invented about 15,000 years before the wheel. Edward VII of England once said to his mistress Lily Langtry, "Madam, I have spent enough on you to build a battleship," she replied, "and you have spent enough on me to float one." After finding a 36-year-old steppe bison preserved in the ice, Alaskan zoology professor R. Dale Guthrie and his team ate some of its flesh. King Ludwig II, the Mad King of Bavaria, loved fairy tales and built the famous Neuschwanstein Castle, which inspired Disneyland's Sleeping Beauty Castle. However, his excessive spending bankrupted the state, and he was eventually declared insane and found dead under mysterious circumstances. Kim Jong-il built a village on the border of North and South Korea to try to trick South Koreans into defecting in 1989. H.G. Wells, the famous sci-fi author, once got a bad review and decided to take matters into his own hands. He and his mistress made love on top of the review and then set it on fire. Marilyn Monroe grew up in an orphanage. 11 families tried adopting her, but they all returned her. Pineapples in the 18th century used to be rented as a symbol of wealth and power. People would rent them just for a single night to show off to fellow partygoers. Pope Gregory declared war on cats in the 13th century, believing they were agents of the devil, and ordered their extermination. How catastrophic. In ancient Babylon, at the end of the New Year's festival, the king of Babylon would enter the temple and literally get slapped in the face by a priest. It was celebrated even more if the slap was hard enough to make the king cry. The Mayans would butt-chug alcohol. They would use alcohol enemas to get drunk. They called it bulch, and it involved squirting a fermented drink made from tree bark up their rear ends using a tube. The scarcity of chocolate during World War II led to the invention of Nutella. Emperor Augustus banished his daughter Julia to a deserted island because she was too sleazy, causing her to die of malnutrition. King Tutankhamun was mummified with a boner. When his embalmed body was discovered, his magic stick stood upright. Emperor Hirohito of Japan was worshipped as a god during World War II. However, he was forced to renounce his divine status after Japan's defeat. Emperor Elagabalus was a transvestite who solicited himself as a prostitute in brothels. He even wanted to undergo a sex change. One of North Korea's largest exports is giant statues of foreign dictators. During the American Civil War, Union and Confederate soldiers sometimes engaged in siege warfare against opposing troops by exchanging insults and banter instead of actual combat. Pope Leo I once convinced Attila the Hun to just turn around and leave, and no one knows how he did it. Ketchup was sold in the 1830s as medicine. It was sold as a cure for an upset stomach and wasn't popularized as a condiment until the late 19th century. Hitler planned to collect thousands of Jewish artifacts to build a museum of an extinct race after the war. King Charles II of England tried to ban coffee houses because they were such hot spots for gossip and political discussions, fearing they would undermine his rule. In the 19th century, the fashion trend was to have a small waist, and women would wear corsets to achieve this look. Some corsets were so tight that they would cause internal organs to shift out of place. It was fashionable for women to have a beauty patch, which was a small piece of velvet or silk applied to the face to hide blemishes. The patches were often shaped like hearts, stars, or other symbols, and were worn on the cheek, forehead, or chin. Some believed that bathing would lead to sickness, which led to people going weeks or even months without bathing, resulting in widespread sickness. Doctors recommended that women who wanted to conceive should drink a potion made from crushed beetles. Locusta, Roman emperor. Nero's personal assassin and the world's first serial killer, was eventually found guilty. Reports differ about how she was punished. She was either assaulted by a male giraffe or she was led around the city in chains and executed. The ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes, known for his simple lifestyle, once mocked the famed philosopher Plato by urinating on him during a public gathering. New Zealand was the first country to allow women to vote. Joseph Stalin was the original Superman. Not many know that Stalin's real name was Iosif Vissarionis Dzhugashvili, which he later changed to Stalin. Stalin means man of steel, so take that, Superman. Emperor Domitian was obsessed with the number 13 and would often order executions in groups of 13. He also had a palace filled with mirrors so he could look at himself from all angles. Emperor Claudius's third wife, Valeria Messalina, was a nymphomaniac. According to ancient historians, she once competed with a prostitute to see who could have the most lovers in a night. Messalina had more lovers than Julius Caesar had stab wounds. President Suharto of Indonesia is considered the world's most corrupt former head of state, embezzling between $15 to $35 billion. Saddam Hussein, former president of Iraq, was given the key to the city of Detroit. Rob Muldoon, Prime Minister of New Zealand in the 1980s, got drunk and decided to spontaneously call a general election. He lost. The Mongols lost to the Japanese in 2 invasions, both times due directly to a typhoon. Nicolae Ceausescu, the dictator of Romania, built himself a palace that was larger than the Palace of Versailles. Crown Prince Sado was a serial R and killer. His father had him sealed inside a rice chest to starve to death. It took him 8 days to die. Jewish boxer Salamo al-Rauch was imprisoned at Auschwitz. He was forced to fight fellow prisoners. The losers were sent to the gas chambers or shot. He survived over 2 years and 200 fights until the camp was liberated. Before alarm clocks were invented, there were knocker-ups in Britain and Ireland who went tapping on clients' windows with long sticks until they were awake. Vladimir Lenin holds the record for the most attempts on his life. Though he often suffered injuries, none of the attempts were successful. King Charles VI of France once mistook his own army for the enemy during battle and attacked them instead. Johann David, leader of the Netherlands, was killed and eaten by an angry mob. Eat the rich, literally. Emperor Nero forcibly castrated a young boy who bore a striking resemblance to his deceased wife and went on to marry him. He kicked his second wife to death while she was pregnant. Vlad the Impaler, the inspiration behind the legend of Dracula, was known for impaling his enemies and displaying their bodies on stakes as a warning to others. He ordered the execution of his first wife in a disturbing display of violence. Ibrahim I once saw the genitalia of a female cow and was apparently quite impressed. So much so that he had a gold cast made of the cow's private parts in a bizarre attempt to find a human match to the bovine privates. Ibrahim ordered his aides to find the fattest woman in the world, After an extensive search, they came across a 300-pound Armenian girl who he called Sugar Cube. Between 1525 and 1866, 12.5 million Africans were kidnapped and sold into slavery in the United States, Caribbean, and South America. During the Middle Ages, it was believed that sperm produced from the left testicle produced girls. To ensure having a son, men would have their left testicle tied off or removed. Talk about a nutty theory. Kim Jong-un, the supreme leader of North Korea, learned to drive at age 3, according to a textbook in North Korea. Some prisoners of war in Canada were treated so nicely that they didn't want to leave Canada when released. In ancient Egypt, people used to shave off their eyebrows when their cats died as a sign of mourning. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh would periodically masturbate into the Nile as a ritual of sorts to guarantee good harvests. Sir Walter Raleigh, a prominent figure in Elizabethan England, was beheaded in 1618 for his involvement in a conspiracy against King James I. After his execution, his decapitated head was embalmed and given to his wife, who kept it in a red leather bag for 29 years. Princess Alexandra of Bavaria was convinced she swallowed an entire glass grand piano as a child, and that any sudden movement would break the instrument. Alexander the Great named over 70 cities after himself. Blackbeard the legendary pirate was known for his fearsome appearance, which he cultivated by tying slow-burning fuses into his beard and lighting them during battles. This gave him a smoky, demonic appearance that struck terror into his enemies. Julius Caesar was such a ladies' man that his own soldiers marched to the tune of "Romans, lock up your wives, the bald adulterer is back in town." In 1847, Robert Liston, nicknamed the fastest knife in the West, performed a leg amputation in 25 seconds. He operated so quickly that he accidentally amputated his assistant's fingers as well. Both patient and assistant later died of infection, and a spectator reportedly died of shock, resulting in the only known surgical procedure with a 300% mortality rate. Alexander Graham Bell thought his invention, the telephone, should be answered. Ahoy, hoy. Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu banned the board game Scrabble, deeming it too intellectual. Buddhist monks in northern Japan would mummify themselves alive by slowly weaning themselves off food and water before eventually starving to death. This was called Sokushinbutsu. Isaac Newton is believed to have died a virgin. The Silk Road was so safe during the Mongol Empire's reign that a maiden laden with gold could travel it and go unharmed. They even planted a bunch of trees for shade and aesthetics. In the Victorian era, men with mustaches used mustache cups. These specially made mugs had guards on them which prevented a man's mustache from dipping into their warm cup of tea. Wealthy Europeans ate corpses, thinking they'd cure them of ailments. They even ate the remains of Egyptian mummies, which tomb raiders risked their lives to steal. Pope Pius II wrote a popular erotic book called The Tale of Two Lovers before assuming office. France was still executing people by guillotine when the first Star Wars film was released in 1977. Benito Mussolini, a fascist dictator of Italy, was expelled from school at age 10 for stabbing a classmate. He later became a teacher before entering politics. President Andrew Jackson fought in a number of duels throughout his life and is said to have carried bullets in his body from his dueling days. Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France before the French Revolution, had a pet sheep that she would dress up in elaborate outfits and take for walks. More planes were destroyed in the war than currently exist on Earth today. There are more people in slavery today than at any time in human history. Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, spent his life searching for the elixir of immortality. Ironically, he died at the age of 49 after taking mercury pills he thought would make him live forever. U.S. President Thomas Jefferson had a notorious affair with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings, and fathered several children with her. Lyudmila Pavlochenko, a Soviet sniper during World War II, was so deadly that the Germans addressed her over loudspeakers, offering her candy and the promise of an officer rank if she defected. Catholic priests during the Middle Ages believed that wet dreams were Lilith, Lucifer's wife, trying to copulate with them to spawn demons. The United States military developed a plan to use bats as weapons. The plan involved attaching small incendiary devices to bats and releasing them over Japanese cities. The United States was the highest spender in World War II, spending an estimated $4.6 trillion on the war. Gouverneur Morris died by sticking a whalebone up his penis to relieve the blockage of his venereal disease. In the 12th century, 2 green-skinned children appeared near the village of Woolpit, England. They spoke an unknown language and only ate green beans. Eventually, they learned English and explained they came from a subterranean world with a green sun. Francisco Nguema, the former dictator of Equatorial Guinea, invited his political opponents to the national stadium under the guise of a celebration. However, the attendees were subjected to a horrifying ordeal. Instead of a festive event, as those were the days played over the loudspeakers, armed men dressed as Santa Claus opened fire on the crowd, killing hundreds of people. A group of undercover cops in Detroit, posing as drug dealers, accidentally met up with another group of undercover cops posing as drug buyers. George IV of England asked every woman he slept with to give him a lock of her hair. He then put them in individual envelopes, each bearing the owner's name. Wolfgang von Kempelen, an 18th century Hungarian inventor, created the mechanical chess-playing machine called the Turk. The automaton amazed audiences by playing chess against skilled opponents, but it was later revealed that a human chess master concealed inside the machine was responsible for its moves. We are also living in the most peaceful time in human history. Al Capone once ran a soup kitchen during the Great Depression and would provide free meals to over 2,000 people per day. During the American Civil War, visiting prostitutes was called enjoying horizontal refreshments. Roman Emperor Commodus collected disabled and little people, ordering them to fight each other to death with meat cleavers in the Colosseum. In 1325, 2 rival Italian city-states, Bologna and Modena, went to war over a stolen bucket. Warren G. Harding wrote erotic letters to his mistress, in which he referred to his magic stick as Jerry. Teddy Roosevelt's mother, Martha, and his wife, Alice, who had just given birth days before, both died in the same house on the same day, hours apart from each other. In his diary entry that day, he drew a large black X and scribbled, "The light has gone out of my life." Peter III of Russia had the most extensive collection of wax toy soldiers in Europe. One day, he discovered a rat had eaten his favorite general, and so he and his top military advisors searched the palace to find the culprit. Hours later, they held a court-martial, found the rat guilty, and executed it by firing squad. Herostratus infamously set fire to the Temple of Artemis, one of the ancient world's 7 wonders. He only did it to have his name written down in history. Charlemagne had a pet elephant whose name was Abu Labas. King Louis XVI had trouble impregnating Marie Antoinette because he had phimosis, the inability to pull back his foreskin. Winston Churchill, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, was known for his love of cigars and alcohol. He once said, "I have taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has taken out of me." President Bill Clinton once correctly answered all questions of a quiz about My Little Pony. Friendship is magic. Emperor Trajan, known for his military conquests, expanded the Roman Empire to its greatest extent and presided over a period of peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana. Franklin D. Roosevelt once accidentally ran into a naked Winston Churchill. When Roosevelt apologized, Churchill said, "The Prime Minister of Great Britain has nothing to hide from the President of the United States." Charles Lucky Luciano survived an assassination attempt that left him with a permanent droop on one side of his face. François L'Oulunay was known for his brutal torture methods. One of his most infamous acts involved cutting open a captive's chest, removing their beating heart, and taking a bite from it. If you were drafted during the American Civil War, you could legally pay someone else $300 to go in your place. Mary Toff put baby rabbits in her female parts and then pretended to give birth to them to confuse doctors. As a solution, priests often slept with a crossover, their nether regions to protect them from Lilith's advances. Roman Emperor Elagabalus was put in power by his mom at the age of 14 and was by all accounts plain crazy. His imperial duties included searching for men with large magic sticks. Ivan the Terrible, the first Tsar of Russia, had a fascination with self-punishment. He would often whip himself and engage in acts of self-mutilation as a form of penance for his sins. Ferdinand VII of Spain had a huge dong. So much, in fact, that it's rumored that one of his wives died of a hemorrhage derived from sleeping with the monarch. He almost died without an heir because he couldn't sleep with the queen's consorts without any damage. John Dillinger, the infamous bank robber, once wrote a letter to Henry Ford thanking him for creating a car that could outrun the police. Tsar Peter III of Russia refused to consummate his marriage to Princess Sophie. He'd rather play with his toy soldiers in bed. Lord Walter Rothschild rode around late 19th century London in a carriage drawn by zebras. Dr. Seuss wrote Green Eggs and Ham on a bet that he couldn't write a book using only 50 different words. Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector of England, was so hated by his enemies that they dug up his corpse 3 years after his death, put it on trial, and then beheaded it. Genghis Khan killed approximately 40 million people in his lifetime. It's also estimated that when he sacked the city of Urgent, he killed over 1 million people in approximately 6 months. Ferdinand I of Austria was a product of inbreeding. He rarely talked and only has 2 surviving quotes. When his cook told him he could not have apricot dumplings because they were out of season, he said, "I'm the emperor and I want dumplings." When a minister informed him of the makings of a revolution, Ferdinand said, "But are they allowed to do that?" During the Battle of Stalingrad, the Soviet Union tried to train dogs to run under enemy tanks with explosives strapped to their backs. However, the dogs were trained using Soviet tanks, so when they were put into action against German tanks, they ran toward the Soviet tanks instead. King Mansa Musa of Mali, who ruled in the 14th century, was the richest person in history. Reportedly, he gave away so much gold during his pilgrimage to Mecca that it caused inflation in the cities he passed through. Chairman Mao Zedong of China killed 45 million people during China's Great Leap. Forward from 1958 to 1962, Ivan the Terrible, the first Tsar of Russia, once beat his pregnant daughter-in-law for wearing immodest clothing, causing her to miscarry. King Louis XIV of France had a special ceremony called the lever. In this ceremony, he would allow his courtiers to watch him wake up and get dressed in the morning. When homosexuality was classified as an illness in Sweden, Tweeds protested by calling in sick to work, claiming they felt gay. Thomas Urquhart, a 17th Scottish aristocrat, reportedly died from laughing at his own joke. His joke was about the death of a Scottish nobleman, and he found it so amusing that he laughed uncontrollably until he eventually passed away. Ancient Rome was 8 times more densely populated than modern New York. President Martin Van Buren wrote an autobiography without mentioning his wife. They even had 6 children together. An ancient Athenian named Thrasylos once sued a statue for killing his friend. The statue had fallen on the man during a storm. The court found the statue guilty, and it was thrown into the sea as a form of punishment. Empress Wu Zetian was the first and only woman emperor of China. She had a large harem of young boys, and it's estimated she slept with over 1,000 men during her reign. Her favorite was a young monk who reportedly had a heavenly endowment. Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, lost her virginity on her mother's grave. Benjamin Rush, a Philadelphian physician and signatory to the Declaration of Independence, believed that being black was a disease. Marquis de Sade, a French nobleman and writer, became synonymous with sadism due to his extreme sexual and violent practices. His name inspired the term sadism used to describe deriving pleasure from inflicting pain on others. Winston Churchill went to a hotel in Munich 2 days in a row to have tea with Hitler. Hitler stood him up both times, and the two men never met. One of the main attractions in Pyongyang's zoo in North Korea is a chimpanzee that smokes a pack of cigarettes a day. Napoleon Bonaparte once sent a letter to his wife, Josephine, that read, "Don't wash yourself. I'll be there soon." Queen Isabella II of Spain was said to have a voracious libido, with her husband reportedly complaining that she wore him out with her nightly demands. President Richard Nixon proposed to his wife the day they met, but unfortunately, she declined his proposal. However, this rejection did not dissuade Nixon from pursuing her further. He continued to court her for the next 2 years in an effort to spend time with her. Nixon even acted as Pat's chauffeur, driving her on dates with other men, which is not creepy at all. In ancient Egypt, cats were highly regarded and even worshipped. Harming a cat, even accidentally, could result in severe punishment, including death. John Pemberton, the inventor of Coca-Cola, did so because he was chronically addicted to morphine and was trying to get off of it. The original ingredients were cocaine, sugar alcohol, and caffeine. Walt Disney gave his housekeeper of 30 years company shares for holiday bonuses, and when she died, her estate was worth $9 million. Aeschylus, the ancient Greek playwright, apparently died because an eagle mistook his bald head for a stone and let a tortoise fall onto his head. They do that to crack open the tortoise, so they're able to eat it, but it seems this time the tortoise won. Emperor Commodus believed himself to be the reincarnation of Hercules, and would often dress in lion skins and carry a club. King Adolf Frederick of Sweden ate himself to death. His last meal consisted of lobster, caviar, kippers, sauerkraut, boiled meats, and 14 semles, a delicious Swedish dessert. He washed all that down with champagne. Bugsy Siegel, one of the founders of Las Vegas, was notorious for his temper and was once rumored to have beaten a hotel employee to death for failing to address him as Mr. Siegel. Powdered wigs were invented to cover up head sores caused by syphilis. Adolf Hitler was an animal lover. He even passed strict animal welfare laws during his time in power. Yet he was responsible for the genocide of millions of people. The world's oldest known customer complaint dates back to ancient Mesopotamia around 1750 BCE. A clay tablet was discovered containing a complaint from a copper merchant named Nani, addressed to a merchant named Anasser. Nani complained about the poor quality of copper ingots he received and expressed his dissatisfaction with Anasser's service. The Mongols would catapult plague victims into enemy territory so the disease would weaken the enemy enough that the Mongols could take over, a form of biological warfare. Christopher Columbus was not actually the first European to reach the Americas. The Vikings had established a settlement in Newfoundland, Canada, around 500 years before Columbus arrived. King Charles V of France was known for his cruelty towards animals and would reportedly throw cats out of windows for fun. Emperor Hadrian had a lover named Antinous, who drowned in the Nile River. Hadrian was so devastated by his death that he had Antinous deified and established a cult in his honor. Grigory Rasputin, the Russian mystic and holy man, was stabbed by a woman with a huge knife. He survived by having some intestines removed. He later called her the Who stuck a knife up my ass. Leif Erikson is regarded as the first European to land in North America nearly 500 years before Columbus. Benjamin Franklin was a U.S. ambassador to France who secured French support during the American Revolution. As a playboy, he slept with the daughters of many French nobles and was such a fashion icon that his clothing influenced French fashion trends. He even wrote a satirical essay about how young men were better off fooling around with old women because the old women were more open-minded, desperate, and willing to do things to get a young guy. He stated that old women looked the same in the dark as a young woman and couldn't get pregnant. Pope Innocent VII drank the blood of 3 boys on his deathbed in an attempt to rejuvenate his body and prolong his life. Kaiser Wilhelm II the last German emperor, had a disturbing teenage crush on his own mother. In letters to her, he detailed his dreams of kissing her and other inappropriate desires. His mother did not reciprocate his advances and instead focused on correcting his grammar. King Louis XIV of France ordered that the tendons of horses be cut to make them walk in a more elegant and refined manner. Casanova regularly slept with his daughter and said no man can love his daughter like a father can. When the D-Day forces landed, Hitler was asleep. None of his generals dared send reinforcements without his permission, and no one dared wake him. Byzantine Emperor Basil II captured 15,000 Bulgarians in battle and blinded 99 out of every 100 prisoners, leaving the last one with a single eye, which earned him the nickname Basil the Bulgar Slayer. President John F. Kennedy proposed a plan to the head of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, for the United States and the Soviet Union to go to the moon together during the midst of the Cold War. Khrushchev was supposed to accept, but backed out after Kennedy's assassination, since the Soviets didn't trust the succeeding president, Lyndon Johnson. Lord Byron, the romantic poet, had a love child with his own sister. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, once escaped an assassination attempt by running around a pillar until the assassin grew tired, allowing the emperor to grab a sword and strike him down. Max Tremmel, a priest on a winter walk one day in 1894, witnessed a young boy slip through some broken ice on the River Inn and saved the boy from certain drowning. That boy was Adolf Hitler. The first battle of the American Civil War was fought on land owned by Mr. Wilbur McLean. After the battle, he decided to move further out in the country to avoid the war, where 4 years later General Lee surrendered to General Grant in Mr. McLean's house. The war started and ended on his property. Mozart exchanged weird, flirtatious letters with his cousin. He once wrote, "Oh, my ass burns like fire. What on earth is the meaning of this? Maybe Muck wants to come out." Benjamin Franklin, one of America's founding fathers, was a nudist and would frequently take air baths by sitting naked in his study with the windows open. Adolf Hitler had never been to a concentration camp. Machiavelli wrote a letter to his friend about how he slept with a prostitute, then threw up all over her when the lights came on because she was so ugly. When Soviet Premier Khrushchev made a state visit to China in 1958, Chairman Mao held a meeting in his pool because he knew Khrushchev couldn't swim. The world's oldest known recipe is a beer recipe from ancient Sumeria, dating back to 1800 BC. Photography is almost 200 years old. The world's first permanent photograph was taken in 1827 and was titled View from the Window at Le Gras. Tamerlane, the ruthless Turco-Mongol conqueror, created skull pyramids from the heads of his enemies who refused to surrender as a warning to others. India produced the largest volunteer army in world history, with over 2.5 million men. At least 38 Indians received the Victoria Cross or the George Cross. Charles VI of France, also known as Charles the Mad, suffered from intermittent psychosis. He ran around screaming until exhausted, refused to bathe for months, and had no idea he was married. Alexander the Great, as a child, threw rare incense into a fire and was punished by his teacher. He later captured Gaza, which produced the incense, and sent a large quantity back to the teacher. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, King George V of England, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia were all first cousins. They were all grandchildren of Queen Victoria. Kaiser Wilhelm famously said about World War I, "If my grandmother had been alive, she would never have allowed it." Catherine the Great of Russia hired professional foot ticklers to satisfy her desires. Pisistratus, one of the first populist dictators, regained control of Athens by addressing a tall farm maiden up as Athena and having her proclaimed to the awestruck Athenians that she intended for Pisistratus to rule. In the 16th century, wealthy Europeans would hire professional mourners to attend their funerals and weep loudly. King Henry of Jerusalem died after he fell from the balcony of his castle. He would have survived, but his dwarf named Scarlet jumped out to save him, but ended up landing on him instead. Persian King Cambyses II dispatched an army of 50,000 soldiers to attack the Oracle of Amun in the Libyan desert. Astonishingly, the entire army vanished without a trace, leaving historians puzzled. Theories range from deadly sandstorms and thirst to the allure of hidden oases. To this day, the fate of the army remains an unsolved historical mystery. In the 16th century, Canada women drank a potion with beaver testicles ground into it as a form of contraception. Napoleon's magic stick is rumored to have been preserved. According to legend, Napoleon's magic stick was removed during his autopsy and was later sold at auction to a collector. Talk about a small fortune. President Theodore Roosevelt had a pet hyena that he kept at the White House named Bill, whom he would often walk on a leash. Pythagoras drowned someone for believing in infinity. Thomas Granger, a 16-year-old indentured servant, was charged with buggery with a mare, a cow, 2 goats, a diverse sheep, 2 calves, and a turkey. It was the first documented execution of a juvenile in the territory of today's United States. Queen Victoria's doctor advised her not to have any more children. She responded with, "Oh, Sir James, am I not to have any more fun in bed?" French fries don't actually come from France. Their origins can be found in Belgium and the American colonies. Nicolae Ceausescu, a communist leader of Romania, and his wife, Elena, were known for their extravagant lifestyle while their people suffered. They were eventually overthrown and executed by firing squad on live television. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were bitter rivals who died on the same day, July the 4th, 1826. Adams' last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives." He was wrong. Jefferson had died hours earlier in Virginia. The oldest condoms ever discovered date back to the 1640s and were made from animal intestines. Humans are 50% heavier and 4 inches taller in the past 100 years than they have been throughout most of human history. Caligula built a lavish, floating pleasure palace complete with lush gardens, opulent living quarters, and even a mini coliseum for his amusement. He hosted Rome's most debauched parties there. The remains of the palace were discovered at the bottom of Lake Nemi, but they were bombed during World War II. President Andrew Jackson was approached by a man who pulled a gun on him. The man pulled the trigger, and the cap went off, but the gunpowder failed to light. The man pulled a second gun and fired, but the gunpowder again failed to light. The assassin tried to get away, but not before Andrew Jackson got him and beat him mercilessly with his cane. Thomas Fitzpatrick, while drunk, stole a small plane from New Jersey and then landed it perfectly on a narrow Manhattan street in front of the bar he had been drinking at to win a bet. He did it again 2 years later after a man didn't believe he had done it the first time. Only 20% of the males born in the Soviet Union in 1923 survived the war. Kennedy famously complained that if he didn't have sex at least once a day, he would start getting headaches. He seems to have taken that very seriously, with a long string of extramarital affairs that spanned over the 3 years he was in office. The women JFK was involved with ranged from movie stars like Marilyn Monroe to young White House interns. JFK's personal doctor, Max Jacobson, also known as Dr. Feelgood, administered methamphetamine injections to the president to help alleviate his chronic pain. JFK received the injections at least a dozen times. Benjamin Franklin once wrote an essay advocating for the use of flatulence as a weapon of mass destruction. In Renaissance France, a woman could take her husband to court if he was impotent. Germany paid off the last of its World War I reparations in 2010. Socrates, the ancient Greek philosopher, never wrote down any of his teachings. His ideas and philosophies were recorded by his student Plato. Some U.S. soldiers would mutilate dead Japanese soldiers and take their body parts as trophies. President Franklin D. Roosevelt received a letter opener made from the bone of a Japanese soldier's arm. Upon learning its origin, Roosevelt ordered the arm to be returned for a proper burial. Victor Hugo, the Romantic writer, slept with so many prostitutes that on the day he died, all the brothels in Paris were closed because so many of the prostitutes took the day off to mourn him. Ancient Thebes once assembled an elite military force consisting of 150 pairs of gay male lovers. They went undefeated in war for years. President John F. Kennedy banned Cuban cigars in 1962, but not before snagging 1,000 for himself. Despite denying his love for cigars, he was later photographed enjoying one during the Cuban Missile Crisis. American soldiers started a riot in New Zealand during World War II because they didn't segregate their bars and didn't want to drink with non-white people. Al Capone's bulletproof Cadillac was eventually seized by the government and would later be used by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Nadal's Koko Kabrinovich, one of the assassins of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, threw a grenade but missed the car. He swallowed cyanide and jumped into the river Miljacka. The cyanide expired and did not work, and the river was only 10 centimeters deep. He was captured seconds later. Joseph Stalin sent assassins to kill Yugoslavian dictator Josip Broz Tito. After the fifth assassin failed, Tito wrote to Stalin, "Stop sending people to kill me. We've already captured 5 of them, one with a bomb and another with a rifle. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send one to Moscow, and I won't have to send a second." Emperor Norton I, a self-proclaimed emperor of the United States in the mid-19th century, despite having no actual political power, was a beloved figure in San Francisco and issued his own currency and decrees. When King Charles II of Navarre was sick, his doctor ordered him to be wrapped in linen and covered in brandy to cure an illness. Unfortunately, instead of cutting the last thread of linen with scissors, the nurse thought it'd be a great idea to burn it off. The alcohol-infused cloth caught on fire, and Charles the Bad, tightly swaddled in the burning linen, was unable to escape, burning the king alive. Queen Elizabeth I of England had a pet monkey named Pug. She would dress up the monkey in human clothing. Fidel Castro was born on Friday the 13th. The ancient Greeks used to exercise in the nude, and the word gymnasium actually means a place to exercise naked in Greek. World War I was the 6th deadliest conflict in world history. Hans Steininger, a 16th century German nobleman, had a beard that measured a whopping 4.5 feet in length. Unfortunately, his impressive facial hair led to his demise when he tripped over his own beard while trying to escape a fire. Swedish King Gustav III once conducted a bizarre experiment to determine the health risks of coffee. He forced a pair of twins to drink massive amounts of coffee, while another pair was made to drink only tea. The king concluded that coffee was perfectly safe. Sideburns are named after American Civil War General Burnside. Before she married, Ronald Nancy Reagan was known around Hollywood for her oral abilities as a young actress. She was well known in the MGM lot, making her a certified throat goat. Julius Caesar was once kidnapped by pirates when he was younger. They demanded a ransom of 20 talents. He laughed and told them that they did not know who they had captured and suggested 50 talents as a much more suitable sum. Once he was freed, he had all the pirates captured and crucified. Mozart, the musical genius, proposed to a woman, then told her to lick his butt and married her sister. William Henry Harrison, the 9th President of the United States, delivered the longest inauguration speech in history, lasting over 2 hours. Unfortunately, he caught a cold during the speech and died of pneumonia just 31 days later, making him the shortest-serving president in American history. There was a team of Jewish assassins who hunted Nazi war criminals after the war ended, called the Avengers. Ice Age Britons used human skulls as cups. Theodore Roosevelt had a pet bear named Teddy that he once spared from being hunted and killed, which is said to have inspired the creation of the teddy bear. Nelson Rockefeller, a former vice president, died of a heart attack while sleeping with his assistant. He was 70 and she was 25. Nelson thought he was coming, but he was going. Charles II of England watched the entire consummation on the wedding night of his nephew and future King William of Orange, while shouting encouragement from the sidelines. Hermann Goering claimed at the Nuremberg trials that the Nazis carefully studied the U.S. practice of forcing Native Americans to move to reservations and used it as a model for forcing Jews to move to ghettos. JFK had a habit of leaving his underwear lying around the White House. He preferred to go commando whenever possible. He also enjoyed skinny dipping in the White House pool with his close friends and advisors. Julius Caesar was the first person in history to have an autopsy after he was assassinated by being stabbed 23 times. Benjamin Franklin, one of America's founding fathers, was a notorious flirt and wrote a book of advice on how to pick up women. Jean Lafitte, the infamous pirate, had a 500 bounty placed on his head by a governor. Jean Lafitte turned the tables on the governor and issued his own bounty on the governor's head for $5,000. Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, kept her late husband's heart in a jar on her desk. Richard Nixon ordered a nuclear strike on North Korea in 1969 while he was drunk for shooting down a spy plane. Henry Kissinger intervened and made him sober up before deciding. Penis rings date back to the 13th century China. They were made from the eyelids of a goat. Roman Emperor Valerian was captured and made a slave after being defeated by Persian King Shapur Afar in the Battle of Odessa. King Shapur humiliated the former Roman emperor by using him as a footstool to mount his horse. Valerian tried to offer a huge ransom in exchange for his release, but as punishment, Shapur forced Valerian to drink molten gold to show his disdain for the offer. He then flayed his corpse and had his skin dyed and displayed at a temple. Salvador Dali, the Spanish painter, believed he was possessed and asked his friend to give him an exorcism in 1947. Paul Kern, a Hungarian man, was shot in the frontal lobe, making it impossible for him to fall asleep. He continued to live a full sleepless life and died in 1955 at the age of 71. Martin Luther, the leader of the Protestant Reformation, suffered from severe constipation. He would spend hours on the toilet, often using the bathroom up to 30 times a day. Ancient Romans celebrated Saturnalia, a festival in which slaves and their masters would switch places. Queen Elizabeth I of England had a strong aversion to bathing and reportedly only bathed once a month. President Sukarno, the first Indonesian president, was targeted by the KGB. They sent him women. He had sex with them and the KGB filmed it. The plan failed when Sukarno asked them to make more copies for him to show off. President John Quincy Adams had a pet alligator that lived in a White House bathtub. Christopher Columbus was convinced that the Earth was shaped like a pear rather than a sphere. During the Battle of Agincourt, the English archers fought pantsless because they had serious diarrhea and were literally pooping themselves as they fought. With each shot fired, they also risked shooting out something else. Blackbeard was killed in a battle with British naval forces off the coast of North Carolina in 1718. He was shot 5 times and stabbed more than 20 times before finally succumbing to his wounds. There was a man who is rumored to have died while pleasuring himself during the volcanic eruption at Pompeii. He died holding his loved one. Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich of Russia once said, "There is a time for business and an hour for pleasure." Pablo Escobar made the Forbes billionaires list of the world's richest people 7 years in a row beginning in 1987 and peaked at number 7 in 1989. However, his immense riches came under scrutiny when Colombian authorities seized some of Escobar's enormous fleet, including 142 planes, 20 helicopters, 32 yachts, and 141 homes and offices. Lord Byron, the poet and lover, collected his lover's pubic hair as souvenirs. He stored them at his publishing house, where they lasted over a century. Can you imagine stumbling upon that hairy situation at work? The Aztecs made human sacrifices to the gods. In 1487, at the dedication of the temple in Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs sacrificed 20,000 people. Every single bellboy aboard the Titanic went down with the ship. Not one of them was older than 17. Most were 16 years old. President Andrew Jackson had a pet parrot named Polly, who was infamous for its foul language. The bird's cursing got so out of hand that it had to be removed from Jackson's funeral service. How's that for political correctness? The 1904 Olympic Marathon in St. Louis, Missouri, was won by an American runner who hitched a ride in a car for 11 miles of the race. You could say he was really driven to win. William C. Minor, one of the contributing writers of the Oxford English Dictionary, chopped off his magic stick, using the pocket knife he used to cut the bound pages of his old first edition book. I guess that's why they call it a dictionary. As late as the 17th century, nannies in Europe gave young boys handies as an efficient way to put them to sleep. Until the early 20th century in Mongolia, criminals could be locked up in a wooden box as punishment, sometimes left to die of starvation. The Catholic Church once put a dead pope on trial. Approximately 750,000 men died in the Civil War, which was more than 2.5% of America's population at the time. Most kamikaze died in vain. Only 1 in 9 kamikaze pilots hit their targets. Butt plugs were originally sold as a miracle cure for headaches, acne, and insanity. Mark Twain, the renowned American writer, was born on the day when Halley's Comet appeared in 1835. He famously predicted that he would go out with the comet, and indeed, he passed away the day after Halley's Comet returned in 1910. Cleopatra, the last queen of ancient Egypt, was known to use crocodile dung as a form of birth control. The ancient Egyptians and Mesopotamians would mold crocodile dung into a block and insert it into a woman's privates, acting as a birth control pessary. Simo Häyhä, a Finnish sniper nicknamed White Death, became one of the deadliest snipers in history. Häyhä killed more than 542 Soviet soldiers in just 100 days. When asked what he felt when killing an enemy soldier, he responded, "The recoil." Napoleon's wife had a friend who was known as government property because she had banged so many ministers of state. Emperor Tiberius once invited a friend to visit from Rhodes. When the friend arrived, Tiberius forgot who he was, declared him a spy, and ordered him to be tortured. Empress Elizabeth of Austria had an obsession with maintaining a tiny waist. She wore a corset so tight that it reportedly caused her to faint regularly. King Louis XVI of France was the shortest reigning monarch in history. He reigned for just 20 minutes. Tsar Peter the Great scoured the Russian Empire in search of dwarves and giants in an effort to breed a race of each. While he couldn't find enough giants, he found many dwarfs. He would bake a huge pie and have a dwarf get naked and wait inside it to jump out and scare guests. Talk about a little surprise. In ancient Rome, there was a trend where people would drink the blood of slain gladiators, believing it would bring them strength and vitality. Winston Churchill was known for his wit and sharp tongue. One day, a woman at a dinner party told him, "If I were your wife, I would poison your coffee." Churchill's instant reply was, "If I were your husband, I would drink it." Catherine the Great of Russia had a reputation for her numerous lovers and sexual escapades. She was said to have had affairs with her courtiers, soldiers, and even her own son's tutor. In the 18th century, it was fashionable for wealthy Europeans to have their own personal dwarfs who would perform for their amusement and even be given as gifts. When Marie Antoinette married King Louis XVII of France, the fireworks display went tragically wrong and killed over 100 people. Democritus, the laughing philosopher, earned his nickname because he was known to laugh at the folly of human ambitions and desires. It is said that he deliberately blinded himself to be less distracted by worldly affairs and to concentrate more on his thinking. Mao Zedong told Henry Kissinger China had a surplus of women and offered the USA 10 million Chinese women. François-Marie Arouet, a French Enlightenment writer, philosopher, and historian, was asked to renounce Satan by a visiting priest. He replied, "This is no time to be making new enemies." Nikola Tesla, the famed inventor, claimed to have invented a death ray that could destroy entire armies from miles away, but it was never proven to exist. Some Holocaust survivors died of chocolate and candy overdose within their first week of freedom. Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, was born on the day the Titanic sank. Ancient Greek democracy, the world's first, lasted for only 185 years. Women used to wear muzzles as punishment. In the 17th century, women who spoke inappropriately had to wear pranks or a scold's bridle, a metal muzzle locked around the head that sometimes included a spiked plate to put in the mouth. The Allied powers used inflatable tanks and planes made of rubber and canvas to deceive the Axis powers into thinking that their forces were larger than they actually were. Meyer Lansky tried to assassinate Cuban leader Fidel Castro by planting a bomb in one of his cigars. William Shakespeare, the famous playwright, was rumored to have smoked marijuana based on the discovery of clay pipes containing cannabis residue found in his garden. Early colonizers of the United States used corn cobs as toilet paper. Talk about a corny solution for toilet paper. King Herod the Great accused his wife of adultery and had her executed. He demanded that her body be preserved in honey. It's rumored that Herod performed disturbing acts with her lifeless body for years afterward. Fidel Castro ordered all game sets of Monopoly to be destroyed. Fidel Castro reportedly survived over 600 assassination attempts. The CIA's plots included exploding cigars, poison pills, and toxic suits. Castro once said, "If surviving assassination attempts were an Olympic event, I would win the gold medal." There was an all-French SS division that was still fighting to defend Berlin in 1945. Napoleon Bonaparte never actually started a war. The University of Oxford is older than the Aztec Empire. Emperor Vitellius had an insatiable appetite for exotic meats, including flamingo tongues, peacock brains, giraffe meat, and even dolphins. He once held a party where he served wine mixed with crushed pearls, which he then proceeded to vomit up onto his guests. Empress Anna Ivanovna of Russia made a prince she disliked dress as a clown and marry an ugly maid of hers. Then Anna built them a palace of ice and made the caged couple spend their wedding night in it, telling them only sex could keep them warm. They nearly died, but a guard snuck them extra clothes. During its peak, the Roman Empire encompassed merely 12% of the global population, making it a relatively modest empire in terms of its size compared to others throughout history. In fact, it ranked as the 28th largest empire ever recorded. The wars between Romans and Persians lasted about 721 years, the longest conflict in human history. It resulted in an estimated 16 to 20 million military and civilian deaths. King Louis XIV of France would have fluids squirted up his butt to stay clean and healthy. Lao Ai was a Chinese servant who had an affair with the Queen Dowager Zhao and was then arranged to be her eunuch to make it convincing. However, the castration was false. He had a magic stick that was such a size it could be used as a carriage axle. Unfortunately, his deception didn't last, and he was dismembered by 5 horses. I wonder what the 5th horse pulled. British soldiers would fire thousands of rounds randomly over the German trenches to boil the water in their machine guns to make tea. Napoleon Bonaparte once took a heavily fortified city by having his men casually walk across the bridge as if peace was just declared and Napoleon's troops were just trying to pass through. Blackbeard's flagship, the Queen, Anne's Revenge, was originally a French slave ship that he captured and outfitted with 40 guns. Carl Joseph Silberbauer, the SS officer who captured Anne Frank and her family, bought her book to see if he was mentioned. In ancient Rome, the punishment for killing one's father was the death penalty, consisting of being sewn up in a sack along with a viper, a dog, and monkey. A World War I homing pigeon saved 194 men by delivering a message, despite losing a leg and an eye and having been shot through the chest. Saddam Hussein, the former dictator of Iraq, commissioned a copy of the Quran to be written in his blood, which took 2 years to complete. Idi Amin was a self-proclaimed last king of Scotland and even claimed to have been knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. Bill Clinton had an affair with Monica Lewinsky, a White House intern. She was 22 and he was 49. Clinton initially denied the affair, but after Lewinsky's testimony and DNA evidence on a dress that she had kept as a memento, it led to Clinton's impeachment. Bill's presidential legacy took quite the blow. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was a Japanese man who survived both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings during World War II. Abraham Lincoln's wife remembered the last words they spoke to one another. She took his hand and held it before the play began, and leaned in to whisper, "Is it all right if we hold hands like this?" Lincoln then leaned towards her and whispered, "Yes, that's quite all right." They watched the rest of the play in that position and lived happily ever after. Chrysippus, a Greek philosopher, allegedly died of laughter after getting his donkey drunk and then watching it trying to eat figs. During wartime, some armies would wipe poop on their spears. This was done so that when they stabbed or slashed enemies, they'd also get infected and die. Talk about a crappy way to go. La Costa, the world's first recorded serial killer, worked as a poisoner for the Roman Emperor Nero. Coco Chanel, the famous fashion designer, was a Nazi sympathizer during World War II and had an affair with a German officer. The first sunglasses were made in 12th century China, and they were used by judges to hide their facial expressions while questioning witnesses. Idi Amin, the dictator of Uganda, was a former professional boxer and also claimed to have supernatural powers. Both Adolf Hitler and Osama bin Laden were announced dead on May 1st. H.P. Lovecraft, the American sci-fi writer, named his cat N-word man. Ferdinand I of Austria was a product of inbreeding. He was epileptic and encephalitic. When he tried consummating his marriage, he had 5 seizures. Blackbeard was rumored to have hidden treasure worth over $120 million that remains undiscovered to this day. Mom Selo Gavrik was the youngest soldier to serve during World War I. He was only 8 years old. The siege of Stalingrad resulted in more Russian deaths, both military and civilian, than the United States and Britain sustained combined in all of World War II. Joseph Stalin, the dictator of the USSR, is believed to have killed between 20 to 60 million people. Menes, the first Egyptian pharaoh, was killed by a hippopotamus. Saddam Hussein was a big fan of Whitney Houston's music. In fact, he had a collection of her albums and even commissioned a bronze statue of the singer to be placed in one of his palaces. Charles III of Sweden had a peculiar habit. He would often go on hunting expeditions disguised as a commoner and challenge random people to duels. It was his way of testing his own skills and keeping his combat abilities sharp. John F. Kennedy was the youngest person ever elected to the presidency at the age of 43. Despite his many accomplishments, Kennedy was a notoriously bad driver and frequently got into car accidents. In fact, he once crashed a car into a lake while on a date with a woman who wasn't his wife. You could say JFK's driving skills were lackluster. The Aztecs sacrificed 1% of their population every year, or about 250,000 people. Peter the Great of Russia would force people he didn't like to marry dwarfs. He and his friends would get drunk and attend the wedding. President George H.W. Bush once vomited on the Prime Minister of Japan during a state banquet. The ancient Romans would put sandals on the hands of sleeping people and then tickle their faces so they would slap themselves. The first European to make a Hawaiian to English dictionary didn't want to scandalize his Victorian readers, so translated the term for male lovers to intimate friend. This caused some degree of confusion when missionaries arrived asking to become the intimate friends of the Hawaiian nobility. A lot of concentration camp prisoners actually died after being liberated. Well-meaning soldiers gave them food, but their bodies were not used to it anymore, so they overate and it literally killed them. Mahatma Gandhi slept naked with young women to test his celibacy. Boston Corbett, the man who shot Lincoln's assassin John Wilkes Booth, was an ever-drunk street preacher and former hatter who cut off his own balls because he didn't like having sexual urges while in the service of the Lord. The Great Emu War was a military operation in Australia in 1932, where soldiers were sent to kill emus that were destroying crops. The emus won. The ancient Greeks used to believe that sneezing was a sign that the gods were watching over them. Pablo Escobar was so wealthy that he had to spend over $2,500 a month just to buy rubber bands to wrap his money. Genghis Khan believed that drinking boiled water was unhealthy and preferred to drink his own urine. He believed that it had health benefits and could help cure illnesses. Emperor Commodus staged a fight against a gladiator who was armed only with a feather duster, purely for the amusement of the crowd. Talk about a real dust-up. Arikion, an ancient Greek wrestler, successfully defended his Olympic title after he had died. His opponent ended up strangling him to death during the match, but before he did, a Riccione broke the guy's ankle, forcing him to forfeit, and the wreath was placed on a Riccione's dead body. Giacomo Casanova, the notorious womanizer, lost his virginity at 11 years old. Franz Stigler, a Luftwaffe pilot, escorted a damaged Allied B-17 bomber until it was safely away from combat. In 1990, the two pilots finally reunited and were close friends until their deaths. It used to be thought that blowing smoke up someone's ass was a way to revive them. King Louis XIV of France was nicknamed the Sun King because he chose the sun as his emblem and believed that he was the center of the universe. Emperor Elagabalus would often seat pompous dinner guests on whoopee cushions that would let out a farting noise. Rasputin had a notorious reputation for his excessive drinking, which frequently led to him engaging in drunken brawls. On one wild occasion, he threw a man into a river and then went on to break into a nearby monastery to steal some wine. The place where Julius Caesar was assassinated is now a sanctuary for cats. During World War II, the French cut the lift cables in the Eiffel Tower so that if Hitler wanted to go up, he'd have to take the stairs. He didn't. Griselda Blanco, also known as the Queen of Cocaine, started using her own product and became crazier. And crazier, she gained a lot of weight and forced men and women to make love to her at gunpoint. Hawaiian kings commonly had harems of both male and female lovers. Al Capone once kidnapped popular jazz musician Fats Waller at gunpoint and ordered him to perform for his birthday party in 1926. Idi Amin, the Ugandan dictator, had so many bodies thrown to the crocodiles in the Nile that they became so fat and lazy that they stopped eating them. Leonardo da Vinci was a vegetarian and animal rights activist who would buy caged birds just to set them free. In the 17th century, a tulip bulb in the Netherlands was worth more than its weight in gold. The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau had a peculiar preference for being spanked by women. He would lurk in dark alleys and secluded corners, exposing his rear end in the hopes of being spanked by a passing woman. Winston Churchill, while First Sea Lord, once quipped that he hated all the deference given to the traditions of the Royal Navy, because those traditions were nothing more than rum, sodomy, and the lash. Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, sent a threat to the Spartans, saying, "If I invade Laconia, you will be destroyed, never to rise again." The Spartans replied with one word, "if." When Bruce Lee was 22, his father told him to get circumcised to make him seem more American. Bruce agreed. You could say Lee's father made sure he was cut out to be an American. Donald Trump's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame has been vandalized multiple times, including being spray-painted with a swastika. Theodore Roosevelt was an avid boxer and had a boxing ring installed in the White House. King Edward VII had a large libido and commissioned a love seat with golden stirrups and knee pads just for lovemaking. He also enjoyed bathing with prostitutes in Champagne. Being a king definitely has its perks. Vincent van Gogh, the post-impressionist painter, only sold one painting during his lifetime and died believing himself to be a failure. In 1930, the BBC reported that there was no news to broadcast and instead played piano music for the entire evening. Fidel Castro named 3 of his sons after Alexander the Great: Alexis, Alejandro, and Alexander. King Henry VII of England wrote a novella defending the Catholic Church against Martin Luther, then he left the Catholic Church. Vladimir Lenin was surprisingly progressive. He legalized homosexuality and abortions, making the Soviet Union the first country in the modern world to allow such procedures. Then Stalin came along and undid all that. The ancient Chinese practiced a form of foot binding on young girls, which involved breaking their toes and bending their feet to make them smaller and more attractive. In the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan's wife could only eat her cucumbers chopped so that she wouldn't please herself. Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France, reportedly uttered her last words to her executioner, saying, "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose," after accidentally stepping on his foot while walking to the guillotine. Diogenes, the ancient Greek philosopher, once walked through the streets of Athens in broad daylight, holding a lantern claiming he was searching for an honest man. Frederick Wilhelm of Prussia, father of Frederick the Great, was obsessed with giants. He would accept unusually tall soldiers as state gifts, form a regiment composed of only the tallest soldiers, and have them parade through his bedroom when he was ill to boost his spirits. He even started his own breeding program, marrying off pairs of giants in the hopes of them producing even more unusually sized children. Peter the Great of Russia executed his wife's lover. He then forced her to keep her lover's head in a jar of alcohol in her bedroom. Tycho Brahe, the Danish astronomer, lost his nose in a sword duel with his cousin over a mathematical computation. To cover up his disfigurement, he wore a prosthetic nose made of silver and gold. He would fill his nose with herbs to mask the stench. In 1923, jockey Frank Hayes won a race at Belmont Park in New York, despite being dead. He suffered a heart attack mid-race, but his body stayed in the saddle until his horse crossed the line. Kim Jong-il's personal sushi chef escaped from North Korea in 2001 by telling them he wanted to buy a sea urchin to cook for him. Alexander the Great defeated Darius III of the Persian Empire, the largest empire in the world at the time, by meeting them in the field in open combat, and he did it twice. In the first battle, he was outnumbered 7-1. In the second battle, he was outnumbered 10-1. He decimated the Persians both times. Millard Fillmore used to sit an inch away from the table and eat until his stomach touched it. I guess this was back when fat equaled wealth. Emperor Nero was known for his love of music, but he was also a terrible singer. He would force his audiences to listen to his performances and applaud him anyway.